So you don't want to wait till you've got all your supporters lined up. You need to introduce stuff early and start getting the public debate going on it.
Okay, so when you say the public debate, both about this piece of legislation and the others you would like to propose, I guess a lot of people feel like they're up against what they would call a liberal media that maybe doesn't want this conversation to occur, that maybe wants to focus on the legislation that they prefer. So how do you get the debate going if you work against a media system that isn't interested in the values that you hold?
Well, first of all, we're no longer dependent on the mainstream media as we once were. We have the internet now. We also have the foreign press. I found that I used to be able to get coverage in the mainstream media in this country by first getting the foreign press to cover it, and then it became news for our domestic media. However, I've also learned something else. What the mainstream media mostly do is to recycle press releases. Every day they get a mountain of press releases. They go through them, pick out the ones that they think would make good news articles, make a few minor changes, and those become the news articles. Guess who writes most of the press releases? We can complain all we want about the liberal media, but the simple fact is that conservatives and libertarians are not putting out as many press releases as our opponents are. I have been to newspaper art offices and TV offices and other media. I have looked at the press releases. But some of the reporters actually invite me to go through their stack of press releases to see if I can find anything interesting. And they are overwhelmingly loaded by our opponents. We have to match our opponents in the production of press releases. Now it's become easier to do that. There are now web-based services. You can prepare a press release and it will send them out to everybody. Every congressman, every senator, every state legislator, every magazine, newspaper, radio station, TV station, it'll make sure they all get them. They've got to pay a little bit of money for that. It's worth it. All right? Trying to produce your own press releases now and making sure they get to their targets and get read, it hardly pays anymore to do that yourself. And I have done plenty of that. I used to regularly produce press releases, print them out on a copying machine, hand carry them from news bureau to news bureau, news desk to news desk. And that's still a good idea, because when you hand deliver them, you can also engage them in conversation. And it is more likely to get their attention if you hand it to them in person and talk to them a little bit about it at the time. But of course, that's not very practical for, to do very much of. You have to choose your targets for that. It also helps that, the press release can't be a treatise. It has to be written just like a news article. So they can just drop it in to their medium with a minimum of changes. Now, they're going to want to change something. They don't feel they've done their job unless they've changed a little bit. You want to give them something to change that's unimportant, so that they don't change something important and screw it up. They will tend to do that. So give them a few little tidbits that they can just scratch out, satisfy themselves that they've done their job, and publish the rest. And make sure they get a press release almost every day on every given subject. One after another, after another, after another. And and it doesn't hurt to meet them socially. Take a reporter out to lunch someday. Get to know them personally. Find out where they hang out. The bars, the restaurants, the clubs, whatever. Whatever turns them on, you be there. Until after a while you become a crony. Okay? You talk to them about their kids, their pets, their school reunion, whatever interests them. If they let them do a lot of the talking, and then they'll listen to you when you want to do some talking. It's just basic socializing, basic connection building. The world runs on connections. The great talent needed to get ahead in this country, in this world, is and long has been making connections. I spent a couple of years in Washington hobnobbing with the movers and shakers that control our lives, sort of. They are not our best and brightest. I'm sorry, but they're not Darth Vaders. They're not sinister guys with evil intentions. They're mostly people like you grew up with, probably C students. They might be reasonably diligent students, at least they were once. When they elevate to a certain degree, a certain stature, they no longer have to do the diligent stuff. They just delegate it to other people. So they're kind of floating on top of a bunch of other people that do all the hard work. They have to rely on people to make recommendations to them, which they basically are just, deciding which of several recommendations to take. They mostly don't know that much. They do not have a grasp of complex systems. They're clueless about unintended consequences. And yet these are the people who essentially make the decisions that affect our lives. They tend to even be sort of suspicious of really talented people. When I was in Washington, D.C., I was often called upon, as I said earlier, to do staff work. But I was also looked upon with suspicion because as an unpaid volunteer, they didn't really control me. And they were very suspicious of very intelligent, very well-educated people that they couldn't control. There is a fundamental problem to having a political and a legal system run by people who are mediocre. And we've got that. Their one key talent is the ability to make connections. You wonder why CEOs make the big bucks in these major corporations. It is not because they're great managers. Most of them are lousy managers. It is mostly because they can make a call to Wall Street and somebody will take their call. They'll take this call because they know him and he knows them. So it's connections. And that's unfortunate because the talent for making connections does not necessarily correlate with the ability to make high-quality decisions about complex problems, or to even recognize good advice when it comes to them from people who do understand these complex systems. The great financial debacle that we've seen was foreseen and warned about by people who knew what they understood the problem and understood what was going to come down. They weren't listened to. Now some of them are being listened to, so after it's a little bit late, But even today, they're getting less and less heed for their warnings. They're still issuing warnings. I mean, the problem has not been solved yet. We could still have a total collapse of the economy. We have at best bought us a little bit of time. The underlying problems are still operating, and we may very well see a total collapse of the economy within a year or two.